Welcome to Think Big with Dan and Qasim. Join hosts Dan Melnick and Qasim Masood as they explore big ideas, limitless possibilities, and engage with visionaries, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders who dare to dream big, get inspired, motivated, and find practical tips for personal growth. Think big, dream bigger, and ignite your potential.
All right. Welcome back, everybody. Our guest today, Nish. I appreciate you being here. And tell us where you're calling in from, first of all, and what you do for a living with the Nepal Tea Collective.
Absolutely, man. Thank you for having me. So my name is Nish, and I'm calling in from Jersey City, New Jersey. And so, I started Nepal Tea Collective about almost 8 years ago in 2016, right after I finished college. So we bring the freshest organic teas directly from the foothills of Himalayas in Nepal and distribute it here.
That's awesome. So tell me a little bit more about your background and what kind of got you interested in working in this space, and what did you kind of notice out there in the market that you were looking to solve when you were creating this brand, or something you were looking to do a little bit differently?
So I never had any intentions of getting into the tea industry, first of all. But interestingly enough, my family comes with a history of more than 40 years in the tea industry. So my mom and dad, they started this first certified organic tea garden in Nepal in 1980s. And since then, it's been organic. I was actually born in a tea farm. Basically, I guess I was meant to be in the tea industry. I just didn't know it. But the thing is, I came to the US in 2011 from Nepal for my undergraduate studies. My dream was to really become a CPA. So I was into accounting, finance. I knew exactly what to do and all of that stuff. And then the thing is, 4 years of liberal arts college completely killed the CPA in me. And now here I am selling tea. But at the same time, a few things that I noticed, I really started the company for two main reasons. One is to create an identity for Nepali teas in general, right? You have the thumbs up right there too. Perfect. So
we can take that out, don't worry.
Yeah. That's to create an identity for Nepali teas, because basically 96% of exports of tea from Nepal is kind of sold in the global market without its identity. So nobody is having the identity about where it's coming from and all of that stuff. So it's just traded blindly, right, in the neighboring countries. So that is one of the biggest problems. Because of that, the farmers are not getting paid enough, and it's not a really sustainable identity that they are being able to create. Second is the tea industry is super old in its supply chain. There's multiple different middlemen, almost 6-7 middlemen in the tea supply chain, where they add little to no value in the entire supply chain. And again, the effect goes back to the farmers because they're not being able to get their identity first. And the second thing is they're not getting paid enough. Now, the bigger problem is their tea is one of the most popular beverage. It's actually the most popular beverage after water. 2.6 billion people drink tea every single day. For a beverage that is so popular, the farmers in most of the developing parts of the world where tea is produced, they're living under poverty. And that's not fair at all. And that is the precise problem that I wanted to solve when starting the Nepal Tea Collective, is how can we create a better trade for the tea from all of these developing parts, starting with Nepal, because I am native there. So how can I create a better system that works for all? Meaning not just the consumers, where they're getting the best prices for the freshest teas, and also the producers, because they need to be able to create an identity, and more than the identity, they need to be able to make living wages and have some form of empowerment, a way of making their standards of living a little bit higher. So those are the two main recent things that we kind of identified and wanted to solve. And the way we solve it is very different and interesting. Two different ways where we solve it. One is we are a public benefit corporation. So because of that, every single tea that we sell, 1% of our top line revenue goes back to the farmers themselves. So with that, an example of the impact of that is just last year, we shared 1% with our farmers last year. That was able to increase the wages of 70 farmers by about 10%. And that's just 1% of our top line revenue. That's how impactful that is. And then similarly, one of the new features that we just integrated, and that's core to the kind of like the DNA of our existence, is traceability and transparency, where every single packet, every every single tea we have, it has a QR code that you can scan, and you'll be able to see when this tea was made, how it was made, and how many kilos, which cultivar, what elevation, every single little detail, along with the faces of the farmers, and a way to tip them directly. And 100% of those tips actually go back to the farmers. So those are the two major ways where we are able to take all of these, middlemen out of the supply chain, because we're getting it directly from the farms and taking that revenue and sharing it with the most vulnerable population in the entire supply chain. So that's how we kind of like are aiming to change the tea industry. And our goal is quite simple, but quite ambitious, where we want to get 1 million farmers out of poverty within their generation and within my lifetime.
That's amazing. Yeah, I love that. And obviously, in tackling two of those issues, which is, the underpayment of farmers and creating kind of an identity for Nepali farmers, specifically in these tea farms, right? So it kind of sounds like you're doing that with your brand, solving both of those things and giving them a face to the name, and, just giving some background story and some, transparency into that, with helps with giving an identity too, but also helps, I'm sure, with the other side of it as well. If people do want to tip and things, to actually have a human connection there. So I guess that's 2 out of the 3 of the things you were trying to do. I know the third you mentioned was obviously the customer experience, great tasting tea. So is there anything different or proprietary about this process you use to create your tea, or anything that makes it a little bit different than your typical tea you might find in a grocery store?
Yeah, absolutely. So a few different things. So Nepal tea is basically, when you think about tea, you have to think of it as wine, because at the end of the day, it's the grapes that is creating that wine. It's different regions, different cultivars, and kind of like processing techniques and all of that kind of stuff. Tea is the exact same way. So it's the same one plant that actually creates all of these different teas. It's called Camellia sinensis. So every single tea is coming from that one plant. But the reason Nepali teas are very different is because of the strategic position that the teas are grown in. So the microclimate, which is currently in the eastern part of Nepal, which is sandwiched between India and China. So the high, very fresh air coming out from the mountains of the north and kind of like the winds blowing it from the south, really kind of they clash with each other in kind of like this nice little microclimate that's created in the eastern hills of Nepal. What that means is it's going to create a very, almost like a volatile environment. And when we might think it's counterintuitive to think like volatile environment, how's that going to make tea better? One of the best things about tea is such a adaptable and versatile plant in itself, where the more difficult the situation is for it to thrive, what's going to happen is it's going to create a lot of interesting defense mechanisms through producing a lot of different compounds that completely translate into flavors. So a lot of the teas that are produced are going to be a lot more floral in that region. Even the black teas are going to be super floral. That's one of the major things. And the second thing that makes it super unique is tea makers all around the world follow a very specific pattern, and tea makers they have a lot of experience and all of that, which is a great thing. One of the things is tea makers in Nepal are absolutely young people that are making all of these teas. So they're not hesitant to experiment with a lot of different things. So they're experimenting with a lot of different techniques, which allows us to create some of the most unique teas all around the world. And a testament to that is the awards, more than 20 international awards that the tea from Nepal has been winning in the past 2 or 3 years. It's just commendable, because those teas are competing against the veteran tea production in all around the world. They're competing with more than 600 farms all around the world, and they're winning like all of these different awards, which really shows the ways and the kind of the uniqueness of the teas and kind of like the experimentation that is going on in the tea industry for Nepal as a geography itself. Among that, there's many different other factors which really play in the uniqueness of Nepali teas, which few of those would be the age of the bushes, the cultivar of the bushes, the acidic soil that is needed in kind of for a good production of tea, and the climate itself is super unique. And at the same time, it's almost virgin gardens, right? So there's not been anything else that have been produced, no chemicals, fertilizers, and all of that stuff, which really creates a natural environment for the tea plants to thrive. So those are some of the things that make it really unique as a new origin. And that's kind of like what we're playing with it.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. I love that. And I guess when you kind of got started with this brand, or at least pushing in the way that you did, what was your kind of general go-to-market strategy when you took over? Were you trying to sell this more like direct to consumer across the world or in the US, or where did you kind of get your start? Or were you kind of looking to get more into wholesale right from the get-go?
So I completely bootstrapped the company until last year, I would say. So right after college, I was a one-person company for 5 years, running the entire company. And it started as a wholesale company, mainly. The idea was to be able to create a global direct-to-consumers company. But because I wanted to bootstrap it, I got into wholesale just to kind of validate the product itself and at the same time create some form of fundamental base for the product that is going to be sustainable. So I started with wholesale for 5 years. I really got into wholesale where I was selling teas to some of the bigger tea companies, some of the other companies that use tea as an ingredient to make their final product. For example, kombucha, chai concentrates, and all of those things. So I was selling to them mostly, but the big dream was always to create a direct-to-consumers company. And I think COVID was the flip that really allowed us to do that, because as COVID hit, one thing that happened was 80% of my wholesale accounts wiped out overnight. So there were no more tea shops, no more cafes that were buying teas from us, obviously, because everything was closed. So I needed to think about something that would get us to gear, or at least pull us through those difficult times. One of the things that I had done when I had started the company in 2016 was that I had invested organically on a Shopify store and kind of built up this organic e-commerce side of things. And tea, interestingly, is food. It's considered food in the US. So basically, we almost doubled our direct-to-consumers revenue during COVID. And COVID was one of almost like blessing in disguise to kind of like push us towards direct-to-consumers. And we started doing that, and we really saw a lot more potential in reaching directly to customers. Our Amazon accounts, we started that. So it kind of like we started getting into the mix. Now, almost 70% of the business is wholesale still, because obviously it's a larger chunk of the business. But at the same time, we're slowly kind of trying to flip that, where we want to make 70% of our business direct to consumers and kind of like the 30% that is always going to be fundamentally wholesale. But one thing we're really proud of is we have been organically growing both of those segments. So diversifying has really been blessing that we kind of got into, because if you see a lot of the direct to consumers company, if they're not omni-channel these days, they're struggling, and especially the ones that have venture capital associated with them, because they're growing at any cost. And Meta and a lot of these ad platforms, because of their algorithm changes and all of these different things that are going on, they're not as great in acquiring customers, especially on the CPG side. So if you're not omni-channel, I think that is a very big disadvantage at this age. And thankfully, we have a lot of different channels that we are kind of going through and kind of like slowly understanding and kind of diversifying. So we're really blessed to have that, though we're growing quite slowly, but at the same time, very cautiously during this. That's been one of our blessings. And the most interesting thing that we did last year is equity crowdfunding. As we saw market and kind of like traction on the direct to consumer side, we wanted to raise funds to really take this to the next level. And one thing we did not want to do was get into venture capital, which has a completely different mindset and at the same time does not necessarily focus on all of the stakeholders, where for us as a public benefit corporation, farmers are one of our biggest stakeholders that we want to create value for. So we did not want to go the venture capital route. So we did an equity crowdfunding where we made our customers the investors of our company. So we recently were able to raise about $600,000 through WeFunder. And that has really allowed us to get all of our customers to be our biggest advocates, be our biggest buyers, and be our cheerleaders in spreading the message about our region and kind of like the traceability aspect and really the fairness that we want to create in the supply chain, especially for the farmers.
I love that. And it's surprised, like I haven't heard much about WeFunder that you just mentioned before. Why do you think people tend to not go down that route and just always are looking for like venture capital rather than going down a route like that? Do you think there's any like particular reason why? Is it like an added challenge, or what do you think the reason is for that? Because I think it's a great idea. Obviously, you have a great following with your D2C model. I feel like people would be eager to, invest and get equity in something that they already love and buy from you all the time. So it makes perfect sense. I'm just surprised I've not heard more people do this. So if anything, I want to highlight it for anybody listening who might be interested or trying to find capital. It's a great mode to be able to do it, I think. So can you just expand on that? Tell us a little bit more about your experience doing that.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of it, people just don't know that there is a way to actually equity crowdfund or be a part of an equity crowdfunding.
Right.
Because in the US, just to be an accredited investor, you have a lot of regulations. Like I think the basic regulation is like you have to earn at least $200,000 or have an asset of more than $2 million or $1 million, I forget. But there's that threshold. Not a lot of people have that exactly. It was not the investing landscape, I would say, was not democratized as it is now. It was only in 2016 or 2017 when WeFunder was one of the biggest advocates of passing that regulation where people could start investing as a syndicate and in all of these different equity crowdfunding platforms. So the rise of Start Engine, WeFunder, there's a few other ones that has finally allowed people and kind of like democratized investing, where people can invest as little as $100, but still they are going through kind of actual investment platforms. So this is very new in a way, where it just started in 2016, 17, when it actually finally became legal and it's in the laws that you can actually invest. That's one part of it. And the second part of it, it's almost like people might be hesitant to an extent about, okay, this is quite new. I have not heard somebody else do it and all of that kind of stuff. But what I am an active advocate of is my company, it was started by crowdfunding. My company in 2016, it was through Kickstarter that I started my company. Even then, like almost 495, almost strangers brought $50,000 to the company. And that was my start of kind of like the company in itself. So I'm a big believer in itself. This was always my route. But at the same time, it's education on both of the side of the spectrum, where investors, a lot of young investors might not have that education about, hey, I can invest and that with a $250, that's it, that kind of stuff. Well, the platforms are finally coming to life. And I think there's a lot more traction in equity crowdfunding stuff. And also that now more than ever, everybody is realizing that community is one of the most important things in any kind of brand. And if you're able to leverage that community, it just makes a perfect recipe for success. And at the same time, even with VC capital, some chunk of it could be through crowdfunding so that there's an extra push. So I'm a biggest advocate. I just think that it's coming up. It might not have been kind of like the norm, but again, it's a lot of work. It's not that you just put it out there and it's just going to go viral or whatever, but who knows, right? But at the same time, it's a lot of work, and it could be seen as a lot of work to get like a small little funding, while maybe the same work could be done to get a $1 million check from a VC or something. But again, it's preference, first of all, about the founders, about how they want to structure their investment raise, and at the same time, appetite from their customers to be actually part of it.
No, it's amazing. I appreciate you highlighting that. I think it's so important as a mode of funding. It's one of the biggest pain points I hear doing the podcast, especially with so many CPG brands that I have on the podcast. It's definitely one of the biggest things that I find is definitely around funding. So for any other avenues that exist out there, I always like to highlight those. So I appreciate you sharing a little bit more about that. And also, just wanted to ask you, I know we talked a little bit outside of right before we hopped on here today about the question I always love to ask everybody on the podcast, which is basically, if you go back to, starting the brand, I know it was only, I think you mentioned about a year and a half ago now, but if you could go back to that time and give yourself any one piece of advice, if you were to start this business again, what do you think that piece of advice would be?
I would actually say get co-founders as early as possible. So it took me about 5 years when I was running just as a one-person company. And if I had the chance to go back, I would probably bring my co-founders. I have 2 other co-founders today. I would probably try to find a way to bring them as early on as possible. Because at the end of the day, being able to find people who are smarter than yourself and who can add value so much into kind of like the traction of the company that you can get is just beyond what I can think of. We have grown probably more in the last 2 years that I've had my co-founders versus the 5 years that I was doing it all by myself. I think that would be my biggest recommendation, is really to get your co-founders as early as possible. And obviously that is one reason I say that, is obviously the growth and the things that you bring in as a co-founder. The second reason I say that is entrepreneurship is lonely if you're a first-time founder and if you're just getting into this journey alone. And a lot of people don't talk about it. It's kind of like, entrepreneurship is almost like a glamorized concept where you only see from the outside what's happening and what they're achieving and all of that. And plus mostly the success stories. You rarely hear about the average entrepreneur stories and kind of like the failures of entrepreneurs in general. So you're almost glamorizing entrepreneurship to a degree, and the loneliness and kind of like the difficult challenges that entrepreneurs face is rarely talked about. And if you have a co-founder, I think that really eliminates some form of that loneliness and kind of that way of working together for a big mission, rather than you kind of diving into it just alone. So I think for those 2 reasons, I think having a co-founder is just amazing.
I think it's great advice, and it's obviously an answer I've heard before, which is basically just, it is glamorized out there in the world, and everything you listen to on social media is just everybody's overnight success story, and like, oh, you haven't done this, I did this in 3 months. It's like, well, oh, yeah, I know you didn't. Like, everybody knows you did. And then we click on your profile and it's a link to a course, so you're trying to sell me, basically. I get it. Like, I get it. I think it is. It's really good advice. And Nish, I just want to give you a quick opportunity as well, just to shout out your website, any of your social media pages, if anybody listening may be interested in, potential business partnership with you, or maybe just wants to find the website and maybe try some tea. I'll let everybody know how to stay in touch with you guys.
You can just get in touch through our website, which is nepalteacollective.com. And we're also pretty active on our LinkedIn and our Instagram. So Nepal Nepal Tea Collective is kind of like the handle for it as well. And if you just want to get in touch with me, I'm always happy to kind of give my email as well. It's Nish, Nish, at nepalteacollective.com.
Well, I really appreciate you being here today, Nish. I appreciate your insights and your expertise in this area. And just want to wish you the best of luck and continued success. And I really look forward to staying in touch as well.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you, man. Thank you for having me.
Nish.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.